Now, under the theme, Delivering on Africa's Promise, the 23rd World Economic Forum on Africa will provide an important platform for regional and global leaders from business, government and civil society to deepen the continent's integration agenda and renew commitments to a sustainable path of growth and development by addressing the following themes. In an interview for tonight's Political Exchange, I asked the Executive Secretary of the Africa Capacity Building Foundation for her expectations of WEF.
The first thing I expect is we'll have very dynamic conversations from a broad variety of people.
Like we always do as Africans.
That's right. And that this time around we will have actual follow-up, because there will be champions and coalitions to work together that will come out of this forum, and we would work together to achieve what is being discussed as the key priorities. The second outcome that I expect is that we would have the key issues that we need to focus on to deliver on the promise of Africa emerge from those conversations, and that the different segments will play their role: the media in popularizing the issues, politicians in taking them up in their manifestos, the private sector in pushing ahead and investing and taking risk in these critical areas, and the civil servants in keeping their efforts day to day to create the policies, to oversee and to follow through. And that organizations like ours are going to have the resources to actually sustain the unlocking of the potential of skills and talent that is needed across the continent.
Now, in the same interview, I also asked Dr. Lucia what she makes of the discord and poor interface between policy, business and society in the determination of Africa's economic aspirations. This is what she had to say.
I'll use an example from a report that we just published, which is Capacity to Manage Natural Resources. And the findings from this report, which looked at 44 countries in Africa and where we are on different dimensions of capabilities and capacities, is that the first interface that we need to work on is between the state and the enterprise. The state needs to put in place a stable macroeconomic environment, put in place policies that excite investment and excite the private sector to come in, secure property rights and make sure that once you have a title, it's yours and you can take long-term views and invest, create opportunities for markets to develop, including building opportunities for regional markets, but also worrying about the distribution of the benefits of economic growth that would come from private investment and the role of business, so that those are shared broadly, which also contributes to stability. The private sector on its side has to stay within its contractual obligations, be attentive to the neighbors, to their activities. So if it's a mine, the communities around the mine. If it's a large-scale infrastructure investment, the environment around it, and to be able to balance the investment for profit purposes with responsibilities to society and to environment. And I think society at large needs to be paying attention to what's going on and holding accountable governments, but also the private sector, and playing the role of watchdogs through civil society organizations. And the civil servants, who are really the ones who are there when political systems change and leaders change, are there to ensure continuity of the reforms, to ensure enforcement of regulations, to keep the dynamism in terms of the policy environment and the investments that are needed, including keeping an eye on the strategic priorities that are emerging. So I think everyone has a role. What is important is how those roles are played and the interface between the different groups. And here I must say a word about the civil service, because civil servants are very hardworking. Sometimes. They need to have proper incentives in order to give the best they can. So bureaucratic hurdles that have been there for historical reasons need to be removed with the modernization of how the civil sector works, so the civil service works. And performance. We have a very good example from Namibia, where the government has used a rapid results approach to introduce performance-based assessment of the civil service. And this has allowed them to link the policy reforms that they're looking for with the performance of the civil servants. And I think this is one of the areas where one can see results.
Yeah.
And then you have an example of Kenya, where they've looked at a long-term vision, embedding that vision into a strategy that is linked to day-to-day implementation of each of the ministries and the individual civil servants.
Yeah.
And you have examples from Zambia, where civil society works with parliament and the executive to challenge some of the definitions of policy, so they enjoy broader conversation and input from society.